So we are recording this meeting. I just want to let everyone know. And I'm going to ask you now to mute. I'm going to do very brief introductions. I'm going to share my screen. Everybody, I assume, can see that. And let me just hold on. Okay. So welcome everyone to this affordable housing event forum. Before I introduce our speakers, who most people seem to know, I really want to thank Kathy Hallis from the Child Care Council of Westchester, who, under her leadership years ago, which actually started in 2017 in public policy, NPW launched an affordable housing subcommittee. And there's so much history to get into, but a special thanks to Kathy for her leadership here and for moving this issue forward. As we all know, it's an issue that impacts everyone. And as we'll hear today, there's particular impact for the nonprofit sector as well. So thank you so much to Kathy. I also want to point out that tomorrow there is another forum happening. And for those of you who are on this Zoom, who have a board of directors, a nonprofit board of directors, nonprofit employees, we really encourage you to encourage them to take tomorrow night's Zoom. And for your workforce, even if you could give them an hour of time as credit, that would be awesome, and your boards as well. So without further ado, Rich Nightingale, Allison Lake, Tiffany Zazula, thank you so much for preparing this and for being here and sharing some just incredibly important information with us. We are doing this under the auspices of NPW, and we are really nothing without our membership, who fortifies and strengthens our organization, where diverse opinions and thoughts are welcome. So thank you to all our members for the important work that you do. And thank you to our business sponsors, a growing list of people and organizations who recognize that their work as well and their workforce is fortified by the nonprofit sector. So thank you for investing in us. And lastly, if you are not a member, what are you waiting for? Please become a member. And now I'm going to hand it over to Rich.
To Allison, really. But thanks everyone for being here, having lunch with us on a Monday. And Allison, take us away.
Okay. Yes, I ditto the good afternoon, and thanks for making time to join this dialogue this afternoon. My name is Allison Lake. I'm the Executive Director of Westchester Children's Association and a proud board member of nonprofit Westchester. So welcome everyone. So today we're here to talk about affordable housing in Westchester County. I want to sort of recognize that NPW has had a subcommittee that's been looking at affordable housing, as Jan mentioned, really shepherded by Kathy Hallis. So thanks again, Kathy. And some of the presentation data that I'll be sharing is from a full PowerPoint presentation that Kathy and others put together. So appreciate that work. So when we think about housing, we know it is one of our basic needs, along with food and water, is shelter that every human being needs. And so there is no better time than the present, I think, for us to think about how are we going to improve housing options here in Westchester County. Most of you are probably aware that Westchester County released a housing report in November 2019. So that was pre-COVID. And nonprofit Westchester conducted a survey of the nonprofit sector that started sort of, I guess, spring 2020 through the summer of 2020. And I'll be sharing some data from that moving forward. But really, I've been tasked with just kind of setting the scene and helping us all kind of think of the context in which we need to consider where we are today. And that for me is really, thinking back historically and understanding what has happened in the country around housing, from the very real government-sponsored programs of housing that excluded African Americans and other people of color in the community, to institutionalized sort of operations like redlining that I think most people are familiar with, that really, said who could or could not move into certain communities, again, restricting African Americans and other people of color around that. Restricted covenants that were in place that really didn't allow you to sell your home to an African American if you so chose. And then the limited financing that was available to African Americans and others in terms of mortgages and predatory financing that people were forced to take because they couldn't get, your traditional mortgage, or take advantage of the GI bills, offering to those who came back from World War II. And so, it's not by mistake that there is a discrepancy in who owns housing in Westchester County and throughout the country, really. The systems worked, the systemic racism worked the way they wanted it to work. And so here we find ourselves today with real gaps, and also understanding that housing actually forms the basis for wealth for families, right? And so when you think of intergenerational wealth and how families are able to build on ownership of a home and pass that on to a generation who can then build, is also the large reason for the racial gaps in wealth that we see around the country today as well. So these are big, big systemic problems, and we understand that, and they can seem daunting. We hope the conversation today gives you some takeaways of what you can do either in your organization or in your community or municipality where you live, because it is, as I said, something that impacts all of us. I think for me, last week there was a lot in the media around the Tulsa massacre that happened, right, in Oklahoma, where there was a Black community, a very stable and wealthy Black community, often called Black Westchester, that was destroyed by white supremacists. So there was housing, there was banking, there was businesses that was destroyed and never able to really come back again. So we know pieces in history. That's one that's been uplifted. Similar things happened in Rosewood, Florida. I mean, there's some that we know, and probably many more that we don't know. I was also just reminded, I was watching something about jazz that came out of Pittsburgh. And they spoke about this community, the Hill community of Pittsburgh, that also was a working middle-class Black community, and the urban renewal that happened in communities in the 50s and 60s often went right through Black communities, whether it was expanding highways or taking back kind of downtown areas, and that Black communities were forced to move and often not able to come back to the level that they were. So we have to sort of understand that context when we talk about housing, and what are some of the proactive things that all of us can do to really move this forward. And with that, I guess I'll pull one stat, and maybe Rich, you can go to slides for me. That will be great. I think people have heard the term cost burden. And I know Tom is on from United Way, who has done a lot of work around the ALICE, where you understand cost of living pieces. But the cost burden says that if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, then you are a cost burdening family. And here in Westchester County as an whole, over 40% of people are spending that amount of money on their housing. But then when you think of, and you narrow it down to just a nonprofit community, that jumps to over 60%. And so here on your screen, you see some typical salaries in our nonprofit community. And it's interesting, again, coming out of the pandemic, where so many of these, we've all taken the term essential and frontline workers. Well, our essential and frontline workers with salaries between $28,000 to $58,000 cannot afford to purchase a medium price home here of Westchester in of any kind. And so these are our home health aides, our maintenance workers, our social workers, those that really form, I think, the backbone of most nonprofit organizations cannot afford housing here. The next slide has some more details in terms of annual income needed to afford a single family home or a condo or a co-op, and then the medium value of a home here. So we have this huge gap, as the numbers at the bottom of this slide point out in red, of medium household income of $89,000, that they would be able to afford a home to 24,000. And yet there's this big gap of almost $500,000 between what people make and then what they could afford in terms of housing here in Westchester. So this really sets the work for us to do. And the next slide, I believe, breaks down a little more from that survey that I mentioned was done over the summer of 2020 by nonprofit Westchester. We had over 500 respondents. 82% of those identified as female. Again, not surprising for those of us who know the nonprofit sector well, that it is often majority female, and over 50% people of color. And so when you look at the numbers here in terms of, again, who can afford to purchase a home here, we have it broken out by Hispanic, Black, and white. And so 70% of nonprofit, again, frontline staff could not afford to live or purchase a home here in Westchester County. There's another slide, the next one, that talks about housing discrimination. And again, back to the historical forces that traditionally made it very difficult for African-American, Hispanic, Latino, other people of color to purchase homes. And that continues to get today around discrimination. I think most people on this Zoom are familiar with the testing that is done where you send a family same credentials into to purchase a home as a white family, and often they are rejected. They're not shown the same homes, or they're not given the same financing opportunities. So this is here with us today. And what we want to really do this afternoon is to jump into some of the myths behind what affordable housing would mean to a community, and then also helping you, as I said initially, for some takeaways of what you can do to help us move that forward. So with that, I'm going to pass the screen over to Richard Nightingale, who I'm sure most people know. Rich is the president and CEO of WestHab, and he's going to do some myth busting for us this afternoon. So Rich, you can take it away.
Thanks so much. I think, where you started, Allison, is so critical. We didn't just wake up and have a Westchester that looks like today. There's an enormous history that created these fault lines in communities, that created the immense segregation that exists across our country. And you will, note, the wealthy suburbs of almost every major urban center follow very similar trends, and a history of exclusion and a history of wealth building by some and not all has helped create what exists today. So when we are working and advocating for affordable housing, we're not trying to, this isn't a new topic that we're trying to create an interest in. There is a correction that needs to occur in our community. And this is such a critical social justice issue. Allison talked about wealth building generationally. Where you live is also where you send your kids to school, and your zip code just equates to so much about your life opportunities, that housing really does intersect with every mission of every member of nonprofit Westchester. And that's been such a unifying thing. I see so many friends on this Zoom, so I don't think anyone's getting like affordable housing advocacy 101 for the first time. But really what we want to do is do some myth busting in very basic ways. So you all have talking points at your next outdoor, socially distanced, whatever you're doing, gathering. And then Tiffany will really get into some of the kind of hard content on how these decisions are made in local communities, and kind of where the action is, to move the needle. So here is, am I on? There we go, right? And because I've prepared these slides, I put a gratuitous picture of a Westhead building in every slide. So, that's just, something you have to endure today. This one is right by the county center in Greenberg. And as we go today and you hear a little more about this content, a much bigger fight on our hands to build this very attractive 28-unit building than we ever anticipated. So here are 10 myths that I will quickly bust that most folks may hear, present today may know, but are useful to have top of mind and are such an important part as we build a YIMBY, a Yes in My Backyard chorus in Westchester. So affordable housing is an issue for about 10% of our community. So many people think they hear affordable housing and they say, yeah, there's some really, really low income folks and, we're really sad about that, but, most people are fine. Well, the Westchester Housing Needs Assessment showed that 40% of our community is cost burdened. And as Allison just showed you in the MPW data, 60% of our sector is cost burdened and 70% of our direct service staff. This is not an issue of a few. The cost of living in Westchester is crushing. And if you're not wealthy, if you can't afford $1 million house and $30,000 plus tax bill a year, this is a tough place to live. And unfortunately, so many people do not fall, in that category, of course. One thing we always run into, right? Affordable housing hurts neighboring property values. So I think it's laudable. I think it's a great thing. I just, I have to take care of my own property value. There's in fact no evidence to show this. Affordable housing is not being built in place of a thriving use. Affordable housing is typically taking a blighted lot, a former office building that's gone vacant, a rundown, church or synagogue that's no longer needed. So it's taking a blighted site. It's taking a site where nothing productive is happening, where probably no taxes are being paid, and putting something attractive and putting something positive. So you can go to the NYU Furman School for infinite data on the impact on neighboring property values. And in fact, there's no evidence that there's decreased property values. And in many cases, there's an increase based on that investment. Affordable housing is an investment in a community. Affordable housing overcrowd school districts. This is another thing that we run into a lot when we're in front of a zoning board, in a municipality that has not been favorable to affordable housing. It's another thing that's just not true. There was a recent Harvard study that showed 100 single family homes produce on average 51 school-age children, and 100 affordable rentals produce on average 31 school-age children. And a big driver for that is that so many people in our community need affordable housing. So affordable housing includes families, but it also includes singles and couples and downsizing seniors and all, a whole diversity of family types. It's not all kids in the school district. For new construction, when 100 new single family homes are built, the gap is even wider. 64 school children, are created from 100 new single family construction, and only 29 from 100 unit multifamily rental building. Affordable housing is the projects, quote unquote. Well, I'll take this one down in two ways. First of all, affordable housing that's being built these days is being built with excellent amenities to a market rate finish. And there's some really beautiful innovations in the affordable housing development area. And then second myth is the projects are slowly becoming no longer the projects. Municipal housing has this bad rap. Municipal housing was built because our country had a housing deficit. It wasn't built to be slums. It wasn't, it's government neglect that has created the current situation. And in fact, most of the major housing authorities in our community are putting in millions of dollars to do substantial redos to their housing. And really, municipal housing is a critical part of the housing stock in our community. So not only is affordable housing not what people think of as the projects aren't what most people think of as the projects. And the fact that, the projects have such a, negative stigma, is another obstacle to all of this. This actually is a building of ours that we built in partnership with Shiloh Baptist Church in New Rochelle. This is an affordable senior building. Another myth is that we don't have appropriate places for affordable housing. Well, I mentioned some of them earlier, vacant sites, office buildings that have outlived their life. It's not like every site is perfect for affordable housing. Nobody is trying to build a skyscraper in, backcountry, North Salem, but there are sites near train stations There are sites near downtowns. And frankly, you have local businesses that can't find employees. You have mom and pop businesses that say, hey, you know, we're right in the downtown. We're right near the train station. We need some housing. We need housing over retail, or we need housing, you know, where there used to be a use and now a building has sat vacant. Our community absolutely has appropriate places for affordable housing. Not all places are, but many are. We just need to help people earn more. Well, that's interesting because we do need to help people earn more. But the reason that's a myth is because it's not the only thing we need to do. We have a community that needs incomes of all types. When you go out to eat, we need a head chef, but we also need line cooks and waiters and busboys. And if our community represents all of those incomes, then there has to be a housing type for all of those incomes. So we can help people. And I know so many of the organizations that are present today do help people be upwardly mobile in their career and gain income. But those jobs still need to be filled. So we will continue to have lower wage earners in our community, and there needs to be a housing type that matches all of the employees that our community needs, especially essential frontline not-for-profit workers. This building here is actually our most recent completed building. This is a 71-unit senior building in Yonkers called Ludlow Commons, and I threw in an interior shot so you could see the kind of bright, you know, attractive spaces that are now being created in affordable housing. This we touched on extensively earlier. Housing segregation happened naturally. Housing segregation happened from very specific exclusionary programs over the course of decades. It's not that, oh, you know, people just prefer to live with people that look like them. No, people were not given the tools and the opportunity and foot in the door to live in every community in our country and in our community. So the segregation that exists so clearly in our county did not just happen. There's a long history here. I recommend, you know, you could Google Richard Rothstein and just watch, you know, in 10 minutes or less, brilliant clips on the history of segregation and around housing and the way that's, you know, formed our current environment. The Westchester housing settlement solved most of these issues. So if you're not aware, you know, our community went through this housing settlement where basically Westchester was under a federal mandate to build 750 units of fair and affordable housing in the 31 municipalities in our community that lacked any kind of racial and ethnic diversity. Well, first of all, isn't it striking that 31 of our 47 municipalities in this county qualified? That 31 of our municipalities had, you know, less than 3% African American, less than 7% Latino residents. That alone kind of almost proves the point, right? So that's 750 units that our county essentially begrudgingly navigated through, a few here and a few there. Well, the new housing needs assessment shows that we need more like 80,000 affordable units to meet the need, including about 12,000 new units. So about, it's a little hard to say here, right? Like about 68,000 people are living in housing, but they're paying too much of their income in that housing, and that needs to be corrected. And then we also need about 12,000 new units. Well, we have all these communities that feel like they just did their share because they did a handful of units towards the 750. Obviously, this did not solve the issue. Everything is generally fine in Westchester. Everything's not generally fine in Westchester. We have a thriving community where a lot of us want to raise families, and we have great schools, and we have, you know, lots of good stuff in Westchester. Housing is one of our critical missed, you know, aspects. We do not have a housing stock that's going to support a thriving community. The fastest age demographic that's growing in Westchester right now is 85 plus. And absolutely, we need to take care of our seniors. But the fastest decreasing is 30 to 45-year-olds. If your community is not attracting young families that want to invest in communities and have decades ahead where they're going to spend money in the downtown and join the PTA and enrich communities, you're missing out. And where are those families going? Those families are going to New Jersey and Long Island and Fairfield County because they cannot afford to live in Westchester. Everything is not generally fine in Westchester. And the last myth is that you have no ability to help the situation. The truth is all of us live somewhere, and all of us have an ability to have our voices heard and create a YIMBY coalition in this county forever, a lasting coalition that starts today. This is our call to action. And trust me, Tiffany is going to give us lots more on this as we go. But those are 10 myths that you shouldn't accept at your next dinner party. And as we go towards solutions here, you'll hear a little more about what we're going to ask each of you to do about it.
Right. Thank you, Rich. And I was going to say too that we could have done a test on this, but I think I like the idea of taking one of those Mythbusters to you wherever you go next with friends and families, and sort of a did you know kind of piece. And I just want to mention here as we transition over to Tiffany that certainly, the county released its report in November 2019, was slated to start to work with municipalities, and then COVID hit and all the, critical things that we know needed to happen. But in my mind, COVID-19 pandemic just really sort of shed light on how much more crucial housing is coming out of the pandemic when, folks were given some relief on eviction and rent. And so those in the housing have said that we could be heading for a real sort of housing tsunami as these moratoriums are lifted and things. So again, more crucial now than ever before. And as we transition to Tiffany Zazula, who is the Deputy Director of Training and Public Engagement, as well as an adjunct professor of law at the Land Use Center of Pace University. And Tiffany is going to sort of dig a little deeper from us and help us understand how local decisions are made and where we can all put some input into how we want to change things moving forward. So I turn it over to you, Tiffany.
Thanks, Allison, and thank you to Nonprofit Westchester, to Allison, to Rich for inviting me. I work at the Land Use Law Center at the Elizabeth House School of Law at Pace University, and we serve a dual mission. And the reason I mention our mission is because I'd love to get all of you involved in our next training program. It's all of you that we do nominate for our programs so that you can come and learn more. So in about 10 minutes, I'm going to give you a crash course on things, but you can actually spend 3 to 4 days if you really want to with us, diving look at Rich, yeah, and I see a few of my old leaders that have been to the program, 3 to 4 days talking all about housing. So we identify respected local leaders in communities, and we provide them with training and technical assistance that they need to hopefully make and support and create very sound land use decisions in their community. So yes, I talk about things from affordable housing all the way to revitalization of communities to protection of ecological corridors. So anything and everything goes on land use, but our mission is to really support municipal local officials, those that are advocates in their community about the variety of land use tools and techniques that are out there that make your communities more sustainable. So before you totally zone me out, which is a small joke, given my profession, don't, because I am not going to get all, academic on you, even though most people, when they meet me, and Rich knows this, at a cocktail party, they typically flee from me as I begin to tell them what my profession is. And I say it's land use, and they're like, snooze fest. But no, this is the most dynamic and exciting field there can possibly be. And that's not just because I work at the Land Use Law Center, but it is in land use that we are shaping and determining where the future growth and where the conservation of and the preservation of our community is going. So typically, I think we have seen in the front page news, right? We read things about how a community is proposing some type of development. And we hear from our local elected official who's quoted as either saying, we hope to approve this, we hope to deny this, we're just considering it, right? This is all about how is it going to impact our residents? And then in that same news article, you begin to read, residents who begin to talk about their issues and their concerns. And we realize how contentious land use is. And it feels like a competition where someone's going to win and where someone's going to lose. And my job, hopefully, is to break that. We do not want that cycle to happen where this feels like a competition. More popular in the news is this slide we are seeing in the national news, local news, is typically this conversation about housing. And yes, Allison said it, Rich said it, Westchester County is an expensive place to live. But this high cost of housing is definitely well known, but it's accepted as a trade-off for living in a great place close to New York City with terrific schools and beautiful open spaces. And it shouldn't be a trade-off. That is the message here I'm trying to send. This is not a trade-off. The truth is that Westchester County can be a place that offers all of these things: open space, good schools, economic stability that people value, and can also provide housing for people at all levels of an income. but that's not how we typically think. And I think housing affordability is not commonly a shared goal in our municipalities. We have housing advocates, many of you on the line today, that are continuing to wage this uphill battle to create more housing for residents, with success in some communities, and I think unfortunately failures in others. But the narrative that affordable housing is good for local communities continues to, I think, be a challenge. And we need to change that narrative here in Westchester County through all of you and through all the people that you interact with at your own cocktail parties. So we just heard from Allison and Rich, and I'm not going to stress it too much again, but residents are stressed. And I think while Westchester County residents feel a strong sense of connection to their municipalities and their local communities, unfortunately, it's been used to weaponize and drive out affordable housing rather than welcome it, okay? And so we do not want to see this 30, 50, 60% of people spending their income on housing. If you want a sustainable community, right, we need to bring that number down so people can now have consumer spending on Main Street, like Rich talked about. We need young people, instead of fleeing, coming to our communities, and we want seniors who want to downsize, have a diversity of housing options in their backyard so that they can stay in the community that they raise their families in. This is the foundation for thriving and sustainable communities. Housing is that, okay? And it's, guess what? It is through local land use and planning that all these decisions are being made. And so that's why I'm giving the little, oh, see, I always forget I have slides. So yeah, see, Rich said, do you want to have slides? I said, no, I'm not gonna have slides because I don't use my slides ever, but here we go. Okay, right, see all these wonderful pictures. Let's get to here we go. All right, so it is through your local members, your volunteers in your community, possibly even your neighbors, that are making decisions each and every day in your municipality about the way you live, the way you work, and the way you actually recreate, okay? It's important to recognize, as Allison and Rich discussed as well, that the past and sometimes the present actions by our local government officials in policies and regulations that they're making play a role in creating and perpetuating discriminatory and exclusionary practices. We have to have our eye on the ball on this. Land use, which zoning and planning fall under this umbrella, is probably one of the most dynamic fields. And this is where change happens in our community, is through this land use process, that by the end of this 5 more minutes that I have, you're all going to be involved in one way or the other. Okay, so your local decision makers are actually creating a blueprint for your community. And I want you to recognize that your individual municipal blueprint of how your community is planned, how it's going to grow and how it's going to sustain itself, as they're lined up and linked together with other municipalities, it creates a regional plan, right? And we can't just work in isolation. We do actually need to look at our neighboring municipalities and work together in this conversation, not just about housing, but simply all things related in land use. And so we have, again, like I said, you have these local land use board members that make these decisions and create that blueprint, and how they get their authority, which can be shocking sometimes. It actually comes from the New York State Constitution. They're authorized, the Constitution authorized our state legislature to adopt laws to protect the public's health, safety, and general welfare. And it's in the wisdom of that state legislature that they delegated a significant amount of authority to regulate land use to the local level. And again, to our local volunteer board members, which brings me back to those training programs that I have. If those local board members become educated, right? And they are, don't get me wrong, but if they become more educated in all things land use and on some of the best practices that we are seeing in the field and innovation that's happening in other municipalities, right? Then they begin to learn, they begin to share that, and we begin to see, I guess, again, that idea of change happening in our municipality for the better. I also want you to realize, though, in New York, and I just was talking about this, there are close to 1,600 villages, towns, and cities across New York. Sometimes I'll talk to someone and they're like, they'll tell me they're from Ossining, and I go, are you from the town or the village? And they're like, huh, I have no idea that there's 2 different municipal governments, right? Some people don't know where they live, quite frankly. But there are actually close to 1,600, and each one has their own local government system, again, making those decisions. They have a planning board, many of you might know about. They have a zoning board of appeals. They have, again, a local legislative body. They have a variety of other types of committees too that are helping make those decisions. And those individuals are given that authority to adopt comprehensive planning, which I'm going to get to, zoning, and subdivision and site plan approvals. And so they're the ones, whether they're responsible for making laws, administering those laws, or acting in a quasi-judicial manner, this is the group of people that are looking at the different policies for your own community. All right, so let's see. Yes. Now, as most of you are aware, given just what is always in the front page, the most significant land use power, which was what I was alluding to before, is zoning, right? Then for those of you that don't know anything about zoning, it divides our communities into different zones and districts, and it prescribes the land use that's going to be there and that intensity of development that is or is not going to be there. That's what each district says. That's what it's telling us in a zoning, through zoning. One thing that the state statutes require are that communities who are creating new regulations and who are maybe looking at changing zoning in their community, all of this has to be in conformance with a document called a community's comprehensive plan. Now, another little tidbit, and I think we're going to go to this, but if there's one thing I ask you to do, which Allison laughed at me before when I told her I was going to tell everyone to do this, but I would like you to go home, or I'd like you to, when we're done with this call, I want you to Google your municipality. I want you to Google if they have a comprehensive plan, which they probably do. I want you to look at what year that comprehensive plan was adopted and just take a sneak peek at it. I'm not asking you to read the whole thing because some of them are quite long, but take a quick look and Google some of the words or do a find of some of the words that are important to you for your municipality. But this is the document that is your society, right? Your community's insurance that the public welfare is being served by future land use regulations that are made. It is the most important tool, I believe, in a municipality's toolbox because, again, it is going to ensure fairness and equity in providing housing, services, health, safety. It has every little bell and whistle you can imagine of what makes up your community in a comprehensive plan. One way to look at your comprehensive plan is it is, in a way, it's the community's New Year's resolution for itself for the next 5 to 10 years. What do you want to be in the next 5 to 10 years? What are the issues that are important? What are the topics that are important? That's what goes into this document. We do recommend doing it every 5 to 10 years for municipalities, or they should revisit it as change occurs within the community. It will have within it, when you open up that document, it has a huge range of topics, right? And geographic areas of importance of your municipality. You can actually look at your comp plan and it might speak to the future of certain vacant parcels that you had no idea that they were talking about. It will begin to talk about transportation. It will begin to talk about, again, your needs of your community. And what's awesome right now is that these comprehensive plans that used to be very siloed in their approach, where they were talking just about housing or just about transportation or economic development, we're beginning to see communities realize that this, of course, land use is multidisciplinary, it's interwoven, it's complex. And so they're beginning to merge those topics together of sustainability, economic development, equity within each and every component of their comprehensive plan. And better yet, I want you to Google, or you're going to do your find and you're going to look, does your community talk about housing within it? Is it thinking about the future of housing, the diversity of housing stock that your community needs to be sustainable? So you're starting to see municipalities, and this is Newcastle's that recently did their comp plan. In their built environment chapter, they begin to think about the different types of housing for those that might be currently underserved. They're encouraging housing. They're linking it, again, to transportation, to services, to the larger community framework. And it's amazing. I mean, I bring up Kingston right now. I know it's not Westchester, but we need to see more and more of this in Westchester County, more and more of these components within the comprehensive plan, talking about a diverse type of housing stock. Okay, so that sounds so easy. And in the next 2 minutes, I'm going to tell you It's never that easy, but because what we typically see in land use is unfortunately this, right? Everyone coming out to somehow put their sign out that they're so angry because now it's in their backyard and we don't want this and we don't want that. And yet, and that's why land use is so controversial and so adversarial. What I encourage people within our training program and the municipal officials that attended, and for all of you, is that we need to set a table for dialogue and conversation about these topics, right? We need to start to build community support. We need to actually get this, and I hate to say it because I typically don't go out at 7 p.m. to my own community meeting, but we need to go out when these issues matter. When that affordable housing development is being proposed, you now know the importance of that, right? How that is going to be a value to your community. And so you need to come out with a strong voice in support of it and become that yes in my backyard. And so it's awesome right now is we are seeing communities now begin the conversation early, very early and proactively. And this is the Dobbs Ferry. This just happened on June 2nd. But they're embracing it now as an opportunity to get people involved and look at all the variety of their organizations that were involved in this community forum. It's not just about affordable housing and that committee. It was about bringing together simply, right, the sustainable Dobbs Ferry. They had their diversity and task force on there and others that were partners in making sure this conversation was heard. And then they talked about it, they educated people about it, and then they began to explore the issues, the challenges, and then the opportunity that housing had, how housing would impact them as a municipality. And so we're seeing these forums, again, get involved in the community forums, get involved in the updates to your comprehensive plan after you read that yours might be from 1974, things have changed, yes. So this is where we're getting ourselves involved. And this, and I'm just going to do my pitch here, this can be in your community, this type of dialogue, but also come to the Land Use Law Center's training programs. They're free, by the way, so this is easy. You spend 4 days with us, you eat good food, you talk to other leaders, right? And you begin to have this conversation about the importance of housing, the importance of land use in building and shaping our community. So that's it for now. I think I did that in like, hopefully my time frame, maybe not. And Allison, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Tiffany. You've given us a lot to think about for sure. And I think, one of the big pieces that you said that sort of stand out in my mind is just the intersectionality of all of this, right? Of housing, of education, of job, of workforce and economics, and, preserving the environment and green space. And all of those people really need to be around the table at a community. So we're going to move to our next segment where Rich and Tiffany are going to give you some real takeaways, because you do have homework as part of this Zoom for us. But before we get there, I also want to encourage, because again, trying to learn as we do these presentations, what is resonating with people, what makes sense for people. So I would ask that people would just put in the chat, if you like, your thoughts on how affordable housing really can strengthen your organization. If you think of it, as we said, as sort of a workforce issue, or your community, if you think of it as more just a standard of living, and how do you improve quality of life and diversity within a community, a municipality. But I really hope that each of you would just take a minute, top of your head, what sort of comes to you on what we can do to strengthen and why we need to strengthen affordable housing here in the county. And while you do that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rich and Tiffany, who are going to, as I said, give you some top 5 takeaways. And then we do want to just at least hopefully have a few minutes for some Q&A. So if you have a question in mind, get that ready. I know we are going to officially end at 1, but Rich and Tiffany and I think Jan as well, will certainly hang on after for those who want to maybe dig a little deeper into the conversation. So Rich, I guess I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure. Yeah, this next slide piece will be about 2 minutes just to wrap this up, and then we'll open up to some of that discussion. And as Allison said, we are happy to stay on the line, a few minutes after 1 for anyone that has an issue to raise or a question to ask. And I think we all basically know at this point, if Tiffany and I are both at the same dinner party, then you're really in trouble. Like you're gonna get a lot of this. You know, when you speak, Tiffany, and I've seen you speak on this topic so many times, always excellently. I can't think of anything in our community that's being delegated to non-expert volunteers that matters this much. And the truth is, a lot of people, not all people, but a lot of people want to be on those boards because they're petrified of change in their community. So like, it's a huge motivating factor to come out against something. It's hard to like, yeah, I really want to fight for that affordable housing across town, but I kind of have a family and I got to get dinner on the table and those meetings go late. But if you don't want that in your community, yeah, you get yourself to that meeting and you get organized. I live in Harrison, which has a not positive history on this topic, and I'm hoping to be a part of changing that. I've gotten people to put mail in my mailbox, not mail to me, walking around putting things in mailboxes that like just put the biggest headline on this stuff, like our infrastructure will be crushed. And I'm looking at it and I go, for 10 units in the downtown, like, so Tiffany, I'm sorry, we'll get into this, as you said, it doesn't have to be this false choice of whether we can have housing that works for our community and thrive. In fact, if we don't have housing that works for our community, we cannot thrive. The trajectory that we're on is not sustainable for a community.
Right. It's the foundation. Like, and we can say this time and time again, but it is the foundation. Diversity and diverse housing stock is exactly what we need for a growing community, for sure. And I got to say that, as Rich is alluding to too, there is a certain like age demographic that sits on the boards because they have more time. I get it, right? And this is the way they're volunteering, serving back. Not to say, by any means, there are tons of municipal officials really working hard towards these issues. I mean, really, it is, when you think about it, everyone, I mean, people have to balance the environment, economics, equity, like these are all, I mean, and put this all together, and it is a tough job. And so that's why I think we come back to our volunteers, hoping to educate them in a variety of those land use tools and techniques and best practices to bring them back home. And most importantly, have the conversation with the citizens about what it is they want, because it's not what they want on the board, right? It's not a personal decision they're making here. They should be reflective of also what our citizens and our residents want. So, Rich, what are our top 5?
Yeah, exactly. I know that Tiffany and I could talk about housing all day. I want to say one last thing for why we're here today on behalf of MPW and how this came to be, and make a little bit of a plug for tomorrow night's session, which will be essentially the same content. So you don't need to come twice. You've done your duty for the week for us. But what I do want you to do is get your fellow board members or the board members of your organization to come tomorrow night. MPW has over 200 not-for-profit members. We probably have on average at least 15 board members, and we probably seek in our board really smart, influential people. So that's 3,000 people that live in our towns, that live in Armonk and Harrison and Irvington and Larchmont, who love your staff, who every day when they come into the office for a board meeting, back when we came into offices for board meetings, they love the receptionist. They love the janitor that's always got a smile on his face. And they're not connecting the dots that person isn't paid a wage to live in our community. So in fact, MPW's thrust here and our way into this issue a little bit is that we have our own chorus. We have 200 members that have staff, that have boards, and we ourselves all live in these communities, or many of us live in these communities. We ourselves can be the chorus. I'm going to fly through this and then we're going to chat. We're sorry, Allison, we love housing. There's nothing you can't take it away from us. As I was flying through the myths, I didn't get to the last couple of pictures. I have a couple of colleagues on the line that'll be upset if I don't talk about this one. This is a brand new 63 unit building that we're building in Yonkers right now called Dayspring Commons. And next door, we're renovating a former church building into a state-of-the-art community center. This is our brand new West Hab Dayspring basketball court. So I just wanted to circle back to that picture. This is the next project that we have in the pipeline. And that diagram that you see on the right with words too small for you to read points out 50 energy efficient and sustainable features that are going into the building. So affordable housing is an incredibly regulated type of development where you can be sure you're going to get a really quality product, and right now a huge thrust for a really green product. So I did just want to go back to those two. And these will be very supportive of Tiffany's presentation. Here are the 5 things you can do. So simple. Learn what's going on in your town. Like Google it. Go online and go to the Village of Croton or Harrison or wherever you live and look for their comp plan. And if there isn't a comp plan, call the neighbor and say, the mayor, and say, why isn't there a comp plan? Why is it not on the website? You could learn when zoning boards meet, when planning boards meet. Right now is a great time because you can probably meet on Zoom. So you can wear sweatpants and learn what's going on in your community.
Yeah.
Tiffany, if it's okay, I'll just fly through these so we can get to the discussion. Jump in as you wish.
Go, Rich, go.
Number 2, be an ambassador and a myth buster. And that way people won't hate when Tiffany and I are walking towards them. We will all be out in our community saying, you know what, you're wrong. Like you're wrong to say this low income thing's not that important, or we don't want that here. Raise your voice in every setting and say, you know what, actually, I was weary about moving to this town because of the lack of diversity. Or actually, I'd love to see that next door to me. That looks beautiful to me. Read your town's comp plan. Tiffany, you got to take this one.
And I think I beat you over the head with this enough, everybody. But yes, you're Googling it, you're reading it. I love the people in the chat that have already Googled and they're starting to look at theirs. So keep at it. Yes, read it. It's the most important document your community has.
I love the idea that it is like your town's kind of strategic plan for the future. And you can read right in there where they envision commerce and where they envision housing and where they envision density. It's incredible. It's all right there. And hopefully it's not from 1974. Yeah. Here's number 1 as we get there. So first you're going to call the mayor and you're going to start being a big agitator and you're going to start zooming into planning meetings and getting annoying at dinner parties. Eventually, right, we need YIMBY people on planning and zoning boards. We want to see a Dobbs Ferry and an Irvington and a Harrison where people are on the planning board because they want to see interesting new things in their town, because they see the demographic trends and they want to serve the community. And of course, many people already do. There are great people on some of these committees as well, who are on those committees for this exact reason. And then lastly, and this is especially for our sector, connect your organization's work to housing. So if you're here and you work for an arts organization or a mental health organization or any kind of organization, this matters to you because you probably love your employees. You probably love the people you serve and you probably love your employees, and you're probably paying them as much as you can possibly eke out of the budget. But when you really take a step back and look at the housing that's available in our community, we're not really doing them justice. And I know a lot of folks here are already housing advocates, and I see a lot of my colleagues and friends that know this content well. But if this is new to you, this should be personal to your organization. Kathy Hallis showed tremendous leadership here. Her organization is the Child Care Council, but you can't afford childcare if you can't afford housing, and you can't afford food if you can't afford housing and childcare, and you can't afford the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. The budget only stretches so far. So I know Tiffany and I use too much of our minutes, Allison, but we'd love to have as much of a discussion as people will stick around for.
Yes. And thank you both, Rich and Tiffany. I think that was great, and the ideas that you put out. So a few questions that came into the chat, and certainly I would just start by saying, and before people have to log off, that yes, we certainly, the full presentation from Nonprofit Westchester is available, as well as sort of a 2-page sort of executive summary that we will be emailing out to everyone who registered, because we do want you to take this back to your organization, to your community, and share with others and start to widen the conversation. So you will get those pieces. So there was a question about how you might suggest municipalities balance, right, the needs of a local municipality with regional planning and opportunities. Someone else in the chat sort of said that they can't afford to live in Westchester. I know people are moving further north into the Hudson Valley, into other counties, Tiffany. So maybe to you, how is the local versus the regional planning, questions?
Well, unfortunately, whether everyone knew it or not, I think hopefully you got this takeaway, but yes, these decisions are made locally. And so the eyes are fixed on right now what we can do as a municipality. And it is hard for municipalities to look at more of the regional issues. However, we are beginning, and through the comprehensive plan, it is important for municipalities to share what they're doing with the neighboring municipalities. Now, you know, we talk about there's talk about the fair share, there's talk about what each community should be doing. There's also a reality too, that each community has different infrastructure, has different opportunities, and we need to look at all of those opportunities for housing. This can't be one community doing it, certainly, but on the same hand, we have to look very closely at where our infrastructure is, and each community can approach the affordable housing issue so differently, whether that be through an accessory apartment or some accessory unit type ordinance, all the way to looking more at where is our infrastructure, because we have that in place. And so we can create a more, you know, dense type of 2 to 3 story building. As Rich said, and I just want to reiterate this again, it is amazing to me, I just did this recently with a municipality. It's amazing to me that when you take away zoning, when you take away everything and just look at your municipalities, you drive through it, how many times people can drive through and say, huh, that spot could have been housing, that spot can be housing. People don't park here all the time. Maybe they, you know, this could be, we create this, or this was a building that, you know, is dilapidated. Let's turn this into housing. So drive through your community and just look at it a little differently. Are there religious organizations or uses that are you know, not being used to their utmost or challenged or have property? It's fascinating to see when you just stop and look at the landscape as it is, how many opportunities, you know, are out there. And so every municipality has to do a little, but I think that's my answer to it. And Allison,
I like that, and we can add that to the 5 about looking through, walking or driving through your community with some fresh eyes and imagining what could be in some places. So we are at the 1 o'clock time, so I want to be respectful of people who may have to sign off, but we're not going anywhere. And Ron, you're raising your hand for a question, or you're just saying hang in there, because we do want to have more of a conversation. Again, anything we didn't get to a question, put it in the chat, because we'll have that as reference. NPW's, you know, policy and housing committee, not going anywhere. You know where to find us if something comes up, and know that we are in conversation with the county, thinking about that more sort of county and regional wide, and trying to advocate for the pieces that we know make sense, either from the municipality. We got to give the county their goals and their working orders, as well as our municipalities, to really make things happen. So I want to thank everyone again for joining our lunch and learn, I guess, if you will. Appreciate your tuning in. Put whatever we didn't get to from you into the chat. So if you have to leave us, I'll say goodbye. But if you want to hang on a minute, if you have some thoughts, we are certainly here and not rushing off. So thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Allison, I see a couple of questions here, and Tiffany,
Okay.
if you don't mind, you'd be the best answerer. How does one get on a planning or zoning board?
oh, good. Oh, I love it. Great question. Whoever posed that, I hope they're still
Bill
on.
Morton from Hope Store. Go ahead.
Okay. Essentially, it's different for every municipality. So let me just say this. I think the best thing to do is to get onto your municipality's website and see the next time one of those planning or zoning board members, there's terms there for the planning and zoning board members. Many of them are appointed though. And so you have to fill out some type of application, sort of put your, you know, name in the running, and you know, the supervisor and the local legislative body typically will appoint the person.
Yep.
So take a look and see where that application is and when the next term of the next planning board member might be expiring. But they could be good people. I'm not, yeah. I mean.
As Tiffany said, it's very often just the mayor appoints people and they're rubber stamped by the town council or by the city council in some certain processes, but there isn't a fancy way. They're not architects. Like, you don't have to be a land use professional. You have to like show up to the meetings enough until you annoy the mayor enough that they put you on the thing. Another question I saw was about what the county could be doing. And I think there's a couple parts there I don't remember who asked that one, but you know, the county is doing a lot and the county could do a lot more. So it's not you know, it's not an attack on what their efforts are. We have 2 big capital programs in this county that are essentially discretionary that our county doesn't have to have. One is a $10 million, essentially a year acquisition fund to help people purchase land for the use of building affordable regulated housing. When you build something through that program, which West have, that's typically how we do with development, It helps us, get that capital for the land. You still have to go out to the state finance agency to get the capital to build the thing, but it'll put a 50-year affordable covenant on the land. And honestly, most things that are built affordable do stay affordable in perpetuity, because the way the grant structure works, at the end of the term, you're pretty much enticed to re-up anyway. But 50 years is long enough, and probably that's really 100 years and forever. The other one is an infrastructure program. And as Tiffany said, communities have different vantage points for this issue. When you're building way North County, often it's impossible to do multifamily without a sewer upgrade or without, so that helps bring utilities to a site. It's actually like the actual nuts and bolts of making utilities work for a site. So the county right now has funded both of those programs at $10 million a year. And that is $20 million that they are bringing to this fight. One other thing I just want to say, and then Tiffany, there's a lot of elements to this one, but, when there was the fair housing settlement, the county was under a decree to build 750 units of housing. However, that housing had to happen in 31 municipalities that the county couldn't make do anything. The county's role was to be persuasive. The county's role was to tell these small towns, hey, we have this acquisition fund, we have this infrastructure fund, we need you to come to the table and help. Hey, we think there's a good site by your train station. Hey, let me introduce you to a really good affordable developer. But it's a very unique thing, because it really goes back to so much that you shared, Tiffany. These decisions are hyper local. So the county was under this decree, but Irvington had to do its piece, and Scarsdale had to do its piece, and Harrison had to do its piece, and that still had to go through their zoning boards and their planning boards that really essentially could have said no.
Yeah, I will say though that also we're talking and and we're saying there's so much everyone can do, and that's true. I also have to say that Westchester County overall, though, even before the settlement, I remember when I first started at the center, we put together a binder, I think that was like this big, of where the municipalities from very beginning, we're some of the first municipalities to have an inclusionary like zoning ordinance, who were beginning to look at the importance of multifamily. There's Terrytown was one of the first to have a floating zone multifamily district and area. So I do want to say that what's amazing to me is that the municipalities have been very creative when trying to do this. It's not, again, we need more, we need to keep having this conversation, but there has been a creativity for a very long time from Westchester County municipalities about this, and trying to figure out ways of approaching, a very hard, a very difficult issue. So just a shout out to their creativity that has happened for a long time.
Right. So those that are still here with us, is anyone a hand raised that wants to throw a question out to us? Any comments? Trying to look at the full screens. You can unmute yourself if you have a comment or question, or put it in the chat.
I'm looking, Allison, too.
Oh, Colleen, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess the question is, since we have Chris and a few other corporate people, what role can the corporate sector play in addressing this issue?
Good question. Anyone want to take that? Tiffany, you want to start? Did you unmute?
I unmuted. So it's interesting. I do think, first of all, you're part of this dialogue. I think what just happened today is so important. And championing, again, this idea of housing overall, that narrative has to continue. We do see a lot of employers, though, doing like employer assisted housing programs, meaning we're seeing them give some type of financial incentives, some down payment assistance. They're getting involved, I guess I should say, in assistance to municipalities. So we'd like to see a much stronger employer assisted housing effort in Westchester. They do it in Long Island. And it has built a lot of success around creation of housing, or at least the creation of housing stability for the employer's workforce. The other thing is, it's shocking to me, maybe not your organizations per se, but other organizations, the hospitals that are out there, the universities that are out there, looking and taking stock at the land that they have, right? And what do they own? And can that be transitioned into housing, and how can that housing then be used for their employees specifically. So we have seen a lot in what, not a lot, but we have seen some hospitals very involved in the housing conversation and actually developing housing on their site for their employees and for others where there's services, right? And finding that is an anchor to the institution. And so it's different ways, but those are just a few suggestions. I don't know if Rich, you have any others, but that was for me. He says no.
You know, I went in and did a lunch and learn a couple years ago for Regeneron, and I thought I was just telling them all about West Hab to recruit, board members, and maybe someone would write me a nice check if I was very friendly. And the questions I was getting by the end of this thing were actually like the employees were saying, I don't have a place to live, and I'm sitting there going, we have like our entry-level engineers are struggling with this issue, and I'm there trying to get them excited about, kind of giving back to someone else. And they're really like, hey, I live in Rockland, I live in Putnam, I commute to Westchester from Jersey, I live with my mom, and it's not ideal for the following reasons. So, I think when you look at our large employers, I think there's opportunity for engagement. I think it's a great question, Colleen, because I think there's more untapped opportunity there.
If I could just add, for the past 12 months, one of the biggest trends we've been seeing has been the increased use or increased interest in impact investing or environmental, social, and governance investing. And it's really come a long way. And one of the biggest conversations that I'm having is on this type of investing called place-based investing. And basically, investors, whether it's institutional investors or individual investors, can basically put money into different things. And one of the areas that they can allocate money is towards supporting affordable housing through their investing. So if you look at nonprofits and the amount of capital that's inside of New York State nonprofits or foundations, and the power that they can do in terms of add capital to help develop affordable housing, I think is also a really big opportunity and probably the area that I'm having the most conversation these days.
Good to know. Did you say place-based, Chris? I didn't.
Place-based investing. I'll send. I could send you Allison or Rich. I could send you Tiffany. I could send just something about it. Just so we're looking at it through the same lens.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or thoughts at this time? I think we are good. Well, we thank all of you for holding on and, continuing the conversation. As we said, please encourage any friends or board members to come on tomorrow night for part 2, although this was certainly the best one, I'm sure. But part 2 tomorrow, and appreciate everyone's time. And you know where to find NPW if you want to engage with us around this conversation. So thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.